Sudan's army says it's willing to extend the 3-day ceasefire that expires at midnight local time amid sporadic fighting around the capital, Khartoum. Its leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has given approval to a plan to extend the truce for another 72 hours and send an army envoy to the South Sudan capital of Juba for talks. There's been no response so far from the rival paramilitary group, the RSF. Arise News chief correspondent John Cookson reports.
Taking advantage of the truce, many families in Khartoum and neighbouring Omdurman have emerged from their homes to seek food and water, lining up at bakeries or grocery stores. These people have been trapped inside for days by the fighting between the army and a rival paramilitary group. This man says, "All normal life has stopped for us. The situation is getting worse day after day. And for the Sudanese living in Khartoum, we're all trying to move our families out in deteriorating living conditions." No one knows for sure how many civilians have been killed already, but it's hundreds. This family lost their 58-year-old mother, Awatif. Her husband, Mohammed, said, "A rocket hit my neighbour's house while I was outside. The shrapnel flew through the kitchen window and struck my wife. She was killed instantly," he said. And the dead mother's daughter, Salma, said, "We relied on her for everything. My mother was deeply religious." Aid agencies who've had to suspend operations in Sudan are calling for a permanent ceasefire as medical supplies and food basics run out.
WHO estimates that 1/4 of the lives lost so far could have been saved with access to basic hemorrhage control. But paramedics, nurses, and doctors are unable to access injured civilians, and civilians are unable to access services. In the capital, Khartoum, 61% of health facilities are closed, and only 16% are operating as normal.
Any ceasefire extension could help international evacuation efforts. Thousands have got out of Sudan, but thousands more have been left behind. John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins us now for more. John, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we heard that report that you did, very thorough indeed. I'm just wondering right now, based on what we heard, a third of the deaths being avoidable if those who are, fleeing the crisis were able to access, medical assistance. What's the situation regarding that at the moment, specifically in getting to health facilities?
Well, things are very difficult on the ground, as we discussed yesterday. Hospitals, such as there are still trying to function, but with a huge number of casualties to deal with when casualties can actually get to a hospital. They're running out of medical equipment. The director there of the World Health Organization saying how difficult it is for medics in Khartoum and other places in Sudan to try to help the people the best they can. No good news, I'm afraid, this morning out of Sudan. There's, despite the so-called truce, there appears to be some heavy fighting north of the capital, quite close to an airbase, where a lot of evacuees have been trying to get out of through particularly the British heavy artillery fire, machine gun fire. But overall, I have to say the truce is holding just about. It expires at midnight local time. And as you said in the intro, both sides have been looking at extending the truce, but still no reply, and there's still no response from the RSF side. Meanwhile, fighting has extended beyond Khartoum and other cities, way over west to Darfur province, where you'll recall years ago so many atrocities were carried out under a previous regime. An area was terrorized by the so-called Janjaweed, which means devils on horseback. And these people have now joined the RSF, one of the factions fighting. So things very, very difficult in Darfur at the moment for a population that has suffered so much. So, as I say, no particularly good news out of Sudan, and everyone's waiting now to see what happens as the midnight hour approaches.
Well, foreign officials are warning that fighting could escalate dramatically. What's the chance of the ceasefire being extended at the moment, John?
It's hard to say at the moment because, as I say, there's been no response from one side, and to an extent, it's out of the two major players' hands. Regional forces have got into play now, with countries like Egypt backing the army, the UAE, Saudi Arabia backing the RSF, and you have all these political wheels in play, and the big prize, of course, at the end of it is control of Sudan, a potentially hugely rich country, rich in minerals, including gold, access to the sea for South Sudan's oil. I mean, the irony is that so many millions of people live in absolute dire poverty in Sudan and South Sudan, and yet beneath their feet, billions of barrels of oil. You know, it could be one of the richest regions in the world, and this is what the major players have got their eyes on for the future. So I'm not optimistic. It looks like a fight almost to the death, you could say, for the two generals who are slugging it out. But what happens beyond that, who knows?
Thank you so much, John. Now, I'd just like to narrow it down to the UK for a moment. When it comes to the element of discretion over, who gets help in Sudan, could you just elaborate on that? Because we understand that hasn't changed.
No, and what the British government has prioritised, first of all, to get the diplomats out, which they did. And then, secondly, those with either British or dual nationality. And there were many Brits in Sudan over the Eid holiday, and they got caught out, including, incredibly, 80 National Health Service doctors were stranded in Khartoum. Now, we don't know how many have got out, but the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, saying today that if this is a message for people still stranded in Khartoum, British subjects or those with British passports, if they can't make their own way to this airfield in the north of the capital, where I said earlier there was heavy fighting, I'm afraid the British government can't help any further, because at some point this air bridge that the Brits have established flying between North Khartoum to Cyprus, it will come under danger of attack, and the British will simply have to stop running this air service for evacuees. As for Sudanese getting sanctuary in Britain, this was debated yesterday in Parliament, and it seems that the government is under pressure politically not to include a vast number of Sudanese arriving as refugees into the UK. As you know, it's a hot topic at the present time, with a bill going through Parliament last night, which will make it very much more difficult for people, indeed from all over the world, crossing the Channel in rubber boats to get asylum in the UK. So all in all, a very difficult situation, and for the Sudanese people who are still stranded there, one's thoughts has to go to them today, because I think it's going to get a lot worse before there's even talk of peace.
Thank you so much, Rise Chief Correspondent John Cookson. Thank you.